My name's Gina Ortiz Jones, and I'm proud to be running for San Antonio mayor.
All right, can you give people a little bit of your background?
Yeah, I think what's important to me, for me, always is, look, I grew up here in San Antonio, but I always like to share that I am a proud first-generation American. My mom came to this country over 40 years ago. She graduated from the #1 university in the Philippines, but came here as a domestic helper. She wanted a shot at the American dream, and she knew that even if she came here in that capacity and was willing to work hard, the sky is the limit, right? So that is the cloth that I am cut from. She raised my sister and I by herself. And she just reminded us that we were very lucky, not smart, lucky to have been born here, and we'd have to give back to a country that gave us so much. It's why I was honored to serve and have been served in a number of ways, and my sister proudly serves in the Navy to this day.
Okay, former Air Force officer.
Yeah.
Can you tell us, take us through some of your professional background, what
Sure.
brought you here?
Yeah, well, I am, first of all, I should say, like, I'm also a proud product of public education. And I think given kind of what's happening in our country right now, I'm very proud of the fact that I went to, frankly, all Title I schools, right? Northside Independent School District. An Air Force ROTC scholarship took me from John Jay High School to Boston University. I earned that scholarship. I will never forget, though, one of the very first things I had to do there, even before my very first class, Garrett, is I had to sign a piece of paper that said I will not engage in homosexual behavior, because don't ask, don't tell was the policy at the time. And I knew what that meant for me as an 18-year-old kid, right? My opportunity to get an education, my opportunity to serve our country, my opportunity to die for our country if need be, all of that goes away just because at the time we did not have enough leaders with the courage to say anybody ready and willing to serve their country should have the opportunity to do so. So you are damn right, when 20-ish years later, when I was honored to serve as the 27th Undersecretary of the Air Force, the second highest person in the Department of the Air Force, I made sure that I was the type of Undersecretary that I wish I would have had when I was that young cadet and that young officer. So that's a little bit about kind of, again, having had that experience, though, I think is really important. It was very formative for me because I had the experience of, frankly, willing to die for my country, but not being able to be open about who I was. And so I'm very now cognizant whenever I'm leading, I want to know, who am I not hearing from, right? Why am I not hearing from them? Right, because I've had the experience where the process, the structures at the time prevented me from being able to be open about about the experiences I was having. And I think, look, if our best and brightest want to raise their right hand and support and defend the Constitution, they should have every opportunity to do so. And I similarly think in our community, there's unfortunately too many communities that have been left behind. And I, as mayor, would make sure that my table was inclusive and I was hearing from as many voices as possible to make sure we were serving as many people as possible and as well as possible.
You've run for Congress twice.
Mm-hmm.
You've been Undersecretary of the Air Force. Mm-hmm. You just recently ran the Find Out PAC, I believe the name was, during the last election cycle, but you haven't had noticeable participation in city-level politics. So why go straight to running for mayor?
Well, I'm very proud of my leadership and my management experience, and I look forward to bringing that in service to my community, right? As the Undersecretary of the Air Force, I ask, it really boils down to two questions, right? And I actually think they're the exact same questions that a mayor needs to ask themselves in leading the city, which is one, do my people have what they need to be successful to do the nation's work? In San Antonio, that looks like, do my people have what they need to be successful, period? Two, are we making smart investments, right? Are we making smart investments? And I think, look, having led a 600,000 person organization, having managed a $173 billion organization, I would argue I bring the most leadership and management experience to this position. And when you look at the challenges that we have in our community, I would argue, on my 100-day plan, again, those are the things that we know what the challenges are in our community. We have studied them for a long time. There's a lot of data around what they are. I think we need to act with urgency to address those things. And that's what I continue to hear from neighbors and from voters, and that's what I look forward to doing and bringing to the office of the mayor.
But why did you think you'd needed to be mayor to do that? As mentioned, you've been involved in federal level politics, state level politics with the PAC, but I mean, why wade into city of San Antonio issues from the start by saying I should be the one in the mayor's office?
I think I bring, again, a certain level of management experience and leadership experience. This is my hometown. This is the community that raised me. I look forward to protecting the opportunities that allowed me to grow up healthy, get an education, and serve our country. Again, lots of feedback and talking to neighbors and voters about what they want. And on my 100-day plan, I talk about the things that people have told me we need to better address, right? Housing affordability, certainly when it comes to also public safety concerns, for making sure that we are doing all we can to set our city up for success and making sure we're investing in early childhood education, and most certainly making sure that we've got more transparency around this major kind of generational investment downtown, right? People want to make sure they are cut into the deal. Because there's, the track record on some of these projects is not great. So again, I think I bring a leadership experience, management experience, and certainly a level of urgency and a record of delivering. And I've been very excited and honored by the reception thus far.
Okay. What's your vision for the city? You want to be mayor. Where do you want to lead us over the next 4 years?
Absolutely. So look, I think we start with, where we are now. Right? And that is an understanding that, look, even if we had a different president, even if we had a different governor, the fact is in our community, over half of the kids in our community, grades 3 through 8, are not reading at level. Their math skills are not at level. We have 95,000 working families that are housing insecure. We have 67,000 folks on that wait list at Opportunity Home working for affordable housing. So when we're thinking about these investments in our community, I think it's really important that we are understanding kind of where we are and ultimately where we want to go. So the 100-day plan looks at, hey, what are the things that we can tackle and get the data to very quickly to make sure we are in fact addressing these issues. So for example, the housing affordability. I hear a lot from young folks in particular saying, hey, I can't find an affordable place to rent. Right? So first 100 days, what do I want to do? I want to work with the team, that's the rest of the city council and the city staff, and say, how can we go faster on a certain kind of project? Those projects that are 70 to 100% affordable, that co-locate childcare, and that help us meet our transit-oriented objectives. How can we move faster on those things, right? When people say, hey, this is my number one issue, or one of my top issues, we've got to recognize that, put a plan in place, and then certainly what that also does is signal to developers and investors and say, hey, these are the types of projects that are going to get interest from us, right? I think it's also really important that we are looking at where we have the highest rate of return when it comes to investing in our people. It is always going to be about making sure we are investing in our most important resource, which is our people. You pay at the front end or you pay at the back end, right? You know that, Garrett. And so we know where the highest rate of return is, and it's always going to be investing in young people early. I think Pre-K for SA is a great program. We only meet a fraction of the need. So I want to look first 100 days. Hey, show me that list. How many kids, how much talent are we leaving on the table as a result of not fully funding that program? So what is the number? And then 2, if we wanted to pay for that, what is the cost, right? So now as we're looking at all these other major investments, as we're looking at that bond that's coming up, right, we can look at, again, if we wanted to invest in this, and we know that's where the highest rate of return is, how could we do that as a community? Because again, you and I both know, I would argue, look, if you had more Pre-K for SA, you probably wouldn't need so much ready to work. Right? I think one of the things that we'd also need to focus on is making sure that we have a good handle of how well the programs that we have significantly funded, how well those are working. The Ready to Work program, I think, is an excellent example of where San Antonio's heart is in the right place. But now we've got some data that shows that where we could execute that a little bit better. So when I look at those numbers and you tell me 25% of folks that have gone through that program are still not in an approved job after 12 months, that shows me that we are not training people to need, right? So we've got to look at where we don't have endless resources. I think that's a good program, but we might need to look at how we improve upon the execution. And then absolutely, my vision in the near term certainly includes making sure we've got more data, more transparency, more cost estimates around Project Marvel. People, and because, as I talk to neighbors and I go to neighborhood association meetings, then this is one of the top things that comes up. Because it's not just what we want to do today. People have a long memory, right? They remember the Alamo Dome. They remember the promise that the mayor at the time made that, hey, if we fund the Alamo Dome, we're going to get an NFL team. Well, the Brahmas are cool and all, but that ain't an NFL team, right? They also, know the deal that Judge Nelson made with the Spurs, and he shared this on a podcast recently, where the deal was, publicly financed AT&T Center. The Spurs would pay 20% of their profits each year as a result of that. He said, ask me how much we got over 20 years. 0, right? And oh, by the way, I was just at that town hall that Tommy Calvert had with his constituents who are still clamoring for, hey, where's all that East Side investment that was supposed to come as a result of this in our backyard? As they're looking across AT&T Center and they still see that Coca-Cola distribution truck center, right? So again, it's not just Project Marvel today, I think people have an understanding of, hey, we've ponied up what we were supposed to do. These promises have been broken. So how can we make sure we get a good deal this time? And again, I'm not anti-development. I just want to make sure we get a good deal, right? Because you go to these neighborhood association meetings, and they're not talking about Project Marvel. They are thinking about, hey, Tanglewood Neighborhood Association. Hey, we don't have drainage here. We don't have sufficient drainage here, right? And then I just talked about some of the long-term inequities that we have in our community. So I think it's part of a broader discussion about, how we're going to make sure we get a good deal this time.
Okay. Mentioned several things in there.
I did.
Let's go for it. Let's take a few of them piece by piece.
Yeah.
Project Marvel.
Yeah.
It's the big one in the news at the moment, multi-billion-dollar sports and entertainment district.
Yeah.
That's the city's vision. At the heart of it, possibly up to $1.5 billion new NBA arena. For Project Marvel and the Spurs arena, how appropriate is it to be investing city money? How much? And how much city attention should be on this project?
I'm going to correct you. I don't think it's the city's vision. I think it's the city staff's vision. And that's an important distinction, right? And that's why in the first 100 days, I want to look at that NDA policy, because this has been going on for quite a bit of time. And as you rightly point out, this is a high price tag. And so I think many in the community were surprised that this has been going on for so long without public input, given the significant price tag and given the other needs in our community, right? So first one, but that's because of as the San Antonio Express News and Texas Public Radio have reported, the non-disclosure agreements. Look, I worked in the intelligence community. I know there is a way in which you protect information, but also make sure the decision makers have access to it when they need it. And I would argue taxpayers, voters need access to that information. And so in the first 100 days, I want to look at that NDA policy and say, hey, let's make sure we get this right? What is a policy that allows us to do city business, but also make sure we're bringing in the public's voices? Because I think, some of these city council folks, some of the elected officials were not privy to the details of this, and sounds like are now being wrapped into that. But if city elected officials are brought into the conversation, that means the people are not, right? Because that is their representative. So we need to write that, I think. But I think I also go back to first principles, right? Taxpayers should not be last to know, first to pay. So let's have a true understanding of what this deal is going to look like, how much it's going to cost. I mean, some of the estimates, as I have seen, they actually don't yet even account for what it's going to cost for the Alamo Dome. Right? So this is a much larger bill. I will also say there's a couple of communities that I've heard from that I want to make sure we're accounting for, and that is in particular our police and our fire, right? So discussions now are around potentially using the TERS money. What that assumes, though, is that the money that coming into the general fund from which we pay for fire and police, that it will be sufficient. We shouldn't be assuming these things. We should know the numbers, because if what is coming into the general fund is not sufficient, then you're actually going to go deeper in the hole into the general fund. And again, talk to fire. They're a couple hundred officers short. Talk to the police officers. They'll tell you they're 15 substations short. And we have seen already firsthand, look at LA, what the risks that we might be assuming if we don't have a good understanding of our operational readiness to account for these issues. Let me also just say, so public safety when it comes to those things, but when it comes to Project Marvel, again, it's going to be about a good deal. I just had a roundtable this morning with small businesses, right? Desiree with the Poor House, Angelica with Juice Bunnies, Noah from Tandem, right? And this great cleaning group. They just started LGBTQ-owned cleaning group. And, they would similarly like a shot at being part of that success. So, where does that look? What does that look like in the plan? What is labor's role as part of this? So lots of questions, and I think these are fair questions because I think we all are cheering for our city. We're all cheering for our Spurs, most certainly. But we've got to make sure the city gets a good deal, not just a few.
So what do you define the good deal as? I guess is the specific question. There's a lot of considerations, but what's your answer?
Yeah, well, look, let's understand. Look, let's see what is the cost estimate, right, for police and fire? Okay, first, what is it going to cost? How much? Now, what do folks propose in terms of who pays for that, right? I mean, they're already roughly 2/3 of our general fund. So if we don't have show me the numbers about how much money is going to go from the TERS into that. Like, let's understand what these things are, right? So I don't exactly. It's not clear what that is until we have some type of cost estimate. We don't have that currently. When they talk about various sources of funding, private equity. Let's get these percentages correct. But again, I think when people look at the deal that we just had with the AT&T Center, where 20% 20% of profit was supposed to come in. We didn't get any of that over 20 years. Okay, well now that's a lesson learned, right? So if now it's not a percentage of profit each year, is there a fixed amount that we might be able to count on, right? And some of these, certainly some accounting for small businesses as it relates to some of the vendors and some of the contracts that are afforded with the upkeep and the maintenance and some of these things, as well as, again, yes, most certainly how we're going to account for our public safety. I think, it's also important, as I sat down with other players, other stakeholders in this space, I just sat down with the leader of Centro, right, the person who's in charge of our central business district. I just looked at their strategic plan, and you know what's not there? Project Marvel, right? So Project Marvel now is going to now change, obviously, what that looks like. But I think there's some really good metrics in there that we need to be thinking about in the context of Project Marvel. So when you look at the central business district, one of those metrics that they want is 75% of storefront businesses to be small businesses, right? That's great. That's wonderful, because I don't think anyone comes here to go to Rainforest Cafe, right? I think they want something a little more San Antonio. But that is not just going to happen, especially when you look at some of the challenges that our small businesses already face. One, certainly the cost to be able to rent downtown, but even just delayed construction, right? That prevents people from easily getting to their businesses. And with, there's, obviously there's a lot we could talk just about on that and the delays and what that means for our economy. But I think, we've got to look at it not just in the context of that one project, but what is our vision internal for downtown? What does that mean for housing downtown? I mean, you'll talk to the Centro, Trish DeBerry, the Centro person, their goal at one point was 25,000 families downtown, households downtown. So what does that look like now? And making sure we've got a good mix of it so that, folks that are doing the concessions at the arena, whatever, they don't have to drive all the way out to Medina County to afford a place to buy.
Moving on to Ready to Work, it's a program that you've had some criticism of its performance so far. You're going to be, if you're elected as mayor, you'll be inheriting that. It's got money already coming in and will be cut off within the next few years, but you'll still have that money to spend. How do you adjust that program to where you think it's working better? How specifically?
Yeah, so I think the new metric should be 90% of folks are in an approved job within 90 days, right? Because then that means that we are training people to needs in our community. I just visited the community healthcare professionals on their campus on the south side, and I met there with Randy, who is their chief operating officer. And they're ready to work students rely on a $7,200 Pell Grant to be able to go through that program. And so it's important as we are thinking about that program, also though the ways in which these threats to federal funding might make that look different. But in general, I think we've got to look at the data and training people to need in our community. I sat down with a city councilwoman and she was surprised at the number of folks that we lose in the Ready to Work program to go to Houston, right? Because they pay more. I don't think we should be paying to train people to work in Houston. I think you got to work here in San Antonio. So part of it is also, it sounds like, in the execution and in the oversight of the results of this, and making sure that we are really being thoughtful about what do we actually need to train people for the needs in our community, so that these folks have a job shortly after they complete the program. Because look, let me just say, I went to John Jay High School. I grew up on the far west side of town, so I know exactly the kinds of communities that would benefit from a Ready to Work program if it was working as well as it could be.
When you talk about people going to Houston, how do you prevent that? Are you talking about a clawback, or if someone goes through and they leave for a job in another community? Or how do you make sure that newly trained people work here?
I mean, this should be part of the contract. This should be basic oversight of, you've gone through this program, we have just invested in you, you now commit to work right in our community.
Okay, and you talked about 90 days turnaround.
Yeah. 90 days.
We're not seeing that right now. So what does moving the bar do? How do you help get people into those jobs within the 90 days?
Let me also just say, I think one of the criticisms of and I think it's a fair one for Ready to Work, is it's not being implemented the way it was sold. You've got, the numbers that I just shared with you are based on also some us subsidizing, the taxpayers, the city subsidizing the upskilling programs within these multi-million-dollar corporations. Having worked in private, right, everybody knows that those private corporations, they will invest, of course, in professional development for their folks. So I don't think, taxpayers, I don't think they bought on to, hey, let's subsidize the professional development programs of these multi-million-dollar corporations. So there's that, right?
So I think, do you roll that back? Because that's been one of the big additions of they said, we're not hitting numbers, we should be helping out more with these companies. So do you roll that back, and how do you pivot then?
Yeah, I think you've got to look at what makes the most sense. They were already going to do that, and the challenge with that is that when you upskill those folks, that isn't necessarily something that they can take to another company, right? If they wanted to, right? So I think we've got to look at what makes the most sense. What are some of the challenges within the community to be able to get folks in the door, and how can we look? I think one of the key as I was talking with the folks at the community health care professionals training, part of it is like awareness of the program, and I think that's a part of it, as well as really understanding, okay, where are we having some success, and as we take the feedback of the graduates, what have they said, what have they shared with us that is contributing to them not having a job after 12 months. Like, that seems like a real shortcoming in how we are thinking about not just people through the pipeline, but rather, no kidding, this wasn't just about somebody going through the program. This was about somebody being in a job and kind of tracking them 1 year, 3 years, 5 years, right, to really understand how well something like this could work. Because I'll be honest, because the other criticism has been that there were groups like Project Quest, others that were doing that were doing work like this very similarly already, and had good results. So how might we? To me, look, the measure of success is not more bureaucracy, right? The measure of success is how many people are making more money and being able to contribute to our economy. That's the success.
So how do you meet that bar of the 90 days? I mean, you mentioned we got to talk to people, but what do you actually do to get it done?
Well, so my assessment is based on the data that is currently available on the website. I look forward to reviewing other pieces of information that might not be publicly available that would show us what is contributing to 75%. Right?
Okay. And with you also mentioned the bond project upcoming. 5-year bond program, 2027. Right. The next mayor will be part of shaping that. What are the priorities you want to see going into bond? That's typically where the biggest chunks get taken out of infrastructure. The past 2022 bond program included a housing bond element of that as well.
Yep. Yeah, I think it absolutely has to include more affordable housing. I just told you that there are 67,000 folks waiting for affordable housing. We've got 95,000 families that are housing insecure, so we need more affordable housing. The last bond just included 4,000 affordable units. That's well short of what we need, right? So we need much more affordable housing. To your point, infrastructure, right? I mean, again, the ways in which, unfortunately, there are too many communities in our city that don't have adequate drainage, which then impacts, frankly, insurance claims at times, as I have heard, right? So these are the types of things that I think, and also, well, I will also just say, when we think potentially about pre-K for SA and expanding that, right? That might also be potentially a way in which we can identify resources.
You want to use how would you use the bond to increase pre-K for SA? These are typically capital projects. So how would that work?
Well, I mean, you have to have the infrastructure for it, right? So if there might be a way in which we can expedite the infrastructure to support those things, then we should do that.
Okay. A lot of these things are already in the bond programs. They're perennial.
Yeah.
How would you shift that? How would you want to see the priorities shift? I mean,
part of it isn't, it's a really good question. Part of it isn't just shifting the priorities. Part of it is tracking execution. When you look at the timeliness of some of the bond projects, right, we need certainly more transparency around that, but we can also go faster. I mean, this is a critique that I've heard from many diverse stakeholders, is it takes too long to spend that money. So how might we expedite the process to do that, so we can show people, again, the results of something they voted on several years ago.
You've mentioned it, you've touched on this earlier when talking about Project Marvel, and you said it's the city staff's vision of this. This is a council manager form of government. It's generally bureaucrat-led. They're doing the day-to-day. City council only hires the city manager. City manager runs the rest of the apparatus, hiring on department heads. It's not, a mayor coming in and taking strong action and appointing department heads. You've talked a lot about what you want to do as mayor, but how do you view the role of a mayor in a more bureaucracy-led city?
Look, I think the people doing the city's work are great public servants, right? And when I say bureaucrat, that is in no way a pejorative. Having been a federal civil servant myself and a nonpartisan, apolitical entity there to do the nation's work, I'm very thankful for the people that do our city work. Everyone from our pre-K workers, right, to those that frankly manage our parks, et cetera. I'm very thankful that folks choose to serve our community in that way. I think it is important, though, as elected officials, when we say, hey, community X, this is what I'd like to do. These are the things I think we can work on to improve our community moving forward, that absolutely must drive the discussion about what is done, right? There's the vision and then there's the execution. There is a balance there, but I think it's got to be much more informed by what the people are telling us they are hungry for and what they need in their communities to be able to best raise their families, contribute, and feel safe.
Coming in with minimal background in the city side of things, how do you make sure that you're leading city staff and they're not leading you along? As sometimes there's a criticism that there's too much emphasis on, well, city staff have presented the plan, it's a rubber stamp. How do you make sure that you're in the driver's seat?
Yeah. Well, look, I think having led a large bureaucracy previously, 600,000 folks, managed a $173 billion budget, and that was actually a multi-year budget that I think is a little bit more complicated, and I would argue more strategic than a one-year budgeting process. But look, it is about those touch points, those metrics. How well are we, performing and meeting the things that we said we would do? Again, execution of the bond. Like, let's look at that. Let's look at some of the performance of the investments that we have said that are in process that we want to do, so we can truly understand how well we are, addressing the things that we said we would do. So I think this is a constant conversation with those folks. But look, at the end of the day, we represent the people. And ultimately, the city staff is accountable to the city manager is accountable to the city council, and the city council is accountable to the people. Like, that's how that process works. And so, yes, you got to get to 6 votes on the dais, but the court of public opinion is also quite important.
Okay. Talking about the budget, the current budget, the city had to, tighten its belt a little bit. Still record-sized budget, multi-billion dollars, but they had to pull back on some priorities. We're also looking at a big portion of the budget, hundreds of millions of dollars, comes from federal funds every year at a time when the federal government doesn't appear very friendly to continuing some of those priorities. So how do you approach budgeting from that standpoint when you have an uncertain source of so many dollars, so many priorities that people want to get done?
Yeah. Well, look, I think we've got to start with ensuring how, to your point, there is a lot in movement right now, because it's not just the money that is coming out of the budget. Look, in our community, 11% of our community are veterans, right? And the ways in which that funding from the VA is frankly being attacked. Not only the funding itself, but also the workers themselves, many of which are veterans themselves. When we also look at what is happening to the Department of Education and all that Title I money that is so important to a large percentage of our schools here, as well as just the basic function of CDC, right? All of these things that are so critical in our community. And look, I mean, in general as well, when you look at Military City USA, there is no Military City USA without our federal workers, right? And all the defense contractors in our community that help make that happen. So I would argue it's much broader than just the money that's not coming into our city through the budget. It's a matter of all of these things that are unfortunately going to be impacted. I think this is going to be really important for us then to understand what capacity exists within our nonprofit community to be able to help with some of these things, but also help us understand truly the impact that we are seeing in communities that we might not necessarily be collecting the data ourselves. I think this is going to require, frankly, much greater partnership with us and the delegation, both the federal delegation and the state level delegation, so we can have as strong advocates as possible, and really articulating, the consequences of some of these decisions. It's great that Governor Abbott wants us to have the new cyber command. That's wonderful. And look, we would be fast friends on the economic development, finance fund, that fund that is targeted to help bring businesses here to San Antonio. But it's also important that we recognize the ways in which some of these other policies, for example, those related around reproductive health, are causing doctors to not want to come here and not want to practice here. So I think it's really important that we are balancing our focus on economic growth, if you will, with also an understanding of the ways in which these other things that contribute to the quality of life of our community and the economic strength of our community, aka like healthcare, that those are as strong as can be. I think it's a really uncertain time right now, and so as we think about, certainly engaging with the other Texas cities, certainly engaging with, again, our federal and our state delegation, we're being very clear about what we need, but also certainly the costs and the consequences of some of the things that are happening right now.
Looking forward at the next 4 years,
Yeah.
through the spring of 2029,
Yeah.
what is the single biggest issue facing the city of San Antonio, and how do you propose tackling it?
Yeah, well, I mean, we're seeing with this in this political climate, it is hard to say what that will look like right now. I don't think 6 weeks from now anybody would have anticipated where we would be where we are.
Just the next day, just currently, then, what's the single biggest issue?
Yeah, the single biggest issue that
Yes.
I think is the single biggest issue, as I hear from folks. Well, let me tell you, the three biggest issues that I hear about: housing affordability, public safety, transparency around Project Marvel. But I will say, of the one, and that's really kind of the cloud over all of it, though, is really the uncertainty in this with what is happening in Washington, D.C. If you're a veteran, if you're a federal worker, if you have a kid with special needs in public school, right? Like all of these things are first principles. Frankly, if you are working on the South Side at Toyota and you are thinking about what these tariffs are going to mean to you. So the number one thing that comes across for folks is, look, we need strong leadership that is going to help us navigate through these times and really make sure that people that are making these decisions understand the consequences of it. I will also say, look, Garrett, we're in Military City, USA. And I think just a couple of days ago, I was proud to stand with the Ukraine community, as this was in response to the unfortunate meeting between President Zelensky and our president. And because we're Military City, USA, I think we uniquely understand the importance of our partners and our allies in peace and in war. I will also say my generation, the 9/11 generation, of which we have a lot here in San Antonio, we remember that the only time Article 5, NATO Article 5, an attack on one is an attack on all, the only time that was invoked was after 9/11, right? And so I think, again, in our community, we are dealing not only with rising costs, we are dealing with housing affordability and whatnot, but because so many of us have raised our right hand to support and defend the Constitution, I think we also recognize the precarious time that we're in, given what's happening on the national stage.
All right. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you.